Well, we're going to do this. I feel like this one's going to get me in some trouble. Hey everyone, this is Chris, and you're listening to One Cross Radio. And today we are joined by nobody. It's just me. Dear listener, you might hear our frequent guest and co-host Luna. She is chewing on a bone in the background, and then she'll probably want to come over to me and get some love. You also might hear Jill, the wonderful, reacting to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And you might hear me just reacting to her reactions, because I love her laugh. It's precious to me. Anyways, today we are diving into a post that I did a while ago, last year actually, almost to the day, where last year on the website I did a series of 4 posts ranking the Star Trek films, and I've been on an on and off Trek kick, so I've kind of been wanting to revisit this, so we're going to do this. Now, Trekkies, please don't hate me. We can all have our own opinions. And I get that some of these films are, the order they're in, are probably going to upset some hardcore Trekkies. I really wish I was using the intro to Hot Takes with Billy Business. But these are my opinions. And basically, outside of a couple, where these sit are basically how much I enjoyed them. And I'm not necessarily saying like this film is a better made film than this. Now, certain ones, absolutely. Especially the 12th one. I think that one's gonna be obvious. So don't hate me. Let's get into it. So we're going from least enjoyable or worst to most enjoyable / best. So, kicking off the list at least enjoyable / worst is Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. I really don't think this is going to be a surprise to anybody, especially any Trekkies who have watched the films. There really isn't much to say about this one that hasn't already been said. Like, to be perfectly frank, this film is terrible. There's not anything really good here. The story is really awful. The acting is bland. The effects are terrible. It's just bad. It is almost universally considered the worst Trek film, and for a reason. Like, whatever Shatner was going for, who I'll jokingly call Captain Director Kirk, whatever he was aiming for here, he didn't hit the mark. And he's even said, like, things went wrong with this movie. And the thing is, this isn't even in so bad it's good territory. It's literally just straight up the worst. They include a character, Spock's brother, Cybok or something. I can't even remember his name. There's hover boots when someone's climbing a mountain. It's just terrible. So it sits at the bottom of this list. Number 11 is Star Trek the Motion Picture. And to me, it makes sense for this to be here. I know some will disagree. Heck, I was even talking about this with a buddy earlier today. Shout out Kyle. He had said, well, like, Trek the Motion Picture, if there wasn't Trek the Motion Picture, there wouldn't have been any of the preceding ones. And not really. Because Trek the Motion Picture, what it was, there almost wasn't any other Trek movies. And the reason it didn't do well, basically, Paramount had canceled Trek. It was doing well in syndication. They were toying with the idea of doing a new series. And then Star Wars dropped, and suddenly sci-fi was the hottest thing. And then Paramount sitting there like, wait, don't we own something Star and sci-fi that a lot of people love? So then they decided to do Trek the Motion Picture. They brought in Roddenberry. There was so many behind the scenes issues. There was constant rewrites, tensions, butting of heads between Roddenberry and other writers, Roddenberry and execs and writers. Like, it was a mess behind the scenes. And what we got in the end was so bloody boring. Like, it really, really is. If you could, it's not the right kind of Trek. Like, people can point to Trek as something slow, and there's a good slow burn, but this is just slow. It's not even good talky Trek where it's about something deeper. It's just really slow. There's no sense of excitement or adventure. You could sum it up as a bunch of annoyingly slow glory shots of the refit Enterprise moving slowly through space. It's just really, really boring. It's a much better made film than Trek 5, but it pales in comparison to, with the exception of Trek 5, every subsequent sequel. As I was talking with my buddy Kyle earlier about this, it's kind of like a lot of Trekkies rank Into Darkness in the dead last, and I'm going to tell y'all now, Into Darkness and none of the Kelvin timeline even crack the top half of this list. Take that for what you will. But Trek the Motion Picture, for those that enjoy it, I'm happy for you. But to me, it's very boring, and the behind the scenes drama shows in this movie. The good thing we got from it, we got two good things from it, and this is gonna sound like a slam, which it technically is, but I don't fully mean it that way. Because it underperformed, Roddenberry was barred from production of future Star Trek movies. And to me, that was legitimately only a good thing. Because Trek the Motion Picture was everything he wanted it to be. If Roddenberry was still involved in production, we would not have gotten Wrath of Khan. We wouldn't have gotten The Voyage Home. We wouldn't have gotten First Contact. We wouldn't have gotten any of the better Trek films. Even some of the worst Trek films weren't as bad as this one. And the other great thing we got out of this was the score by Jerry Goldsmith. It was a wonderful score, and it gave us that amazing theme song for Next Generation. All right, next up is we're switching to the Next Gen chapter of the franchise, because the Star Trek film franchise really has three. The TOS era, which was films 1 through 6. The Next Generation, which was 4 through 10. And the Kelvin timeline, which only has 3 films. There was going to be 4, but there's not. And whatever the heck Quentin Tarantino is going to work on, I have no idea where that falls into things. All right, so the one we're looking at as the next worst is Star Trek Nemesis. And this is, again, one where I think, what can I say that hasn't already been said about Nemesis? It was a real misfire. It wasn't as bad as The Final Frontier or as boring as The Motion Picture, but it's not a good film. I can't remember the name of the director, but he made some very questionable choices. A lot of the stuff feels off. The writing isn't solid, and it is a bit of a mess. The cast all feel really strongly about it, that it's not what it should have been, and it really wasn't the note that those characters should have gone out on. Now, that's not to say that everything in here is bad. Data sacrificing himself and dying, that's a great idea, and the execution was all right. Troy and Riker getting married is awesome. Riker and finally moving on. Some of the themes of the crew splitting up, the family growing, those were all good. Tom Hardy, and I think his first feature, that was a great idea, but the execution was flawed. You can look up on YouTube Tom Hardy's audition across Patty Stew, and the acting there is tremendous. Not that his acting in the film is bad, but the director wanted to go in a different take. And when you see that first take, you're just like, oh man, that's so much better. The young Picard clone idea with Tom Hardy's character of Shizon was interesting. Not necessarily executed the best, but still really interesting. Yeah, it is a mixed bag, and a lot of people point to its failure as a big contributor to Trek's cancellation with Enterprise. I don't think you can put it entirely on Nemesis. Just because, as great as it was, where you got an uninterrupted, almost 16-year run of Trek, I think there was a lot of burnout going on the film front, on the show front, because it was Next Gen, then concurrently with DS9, then concurrently with Voyager, and then Enterprise right after Voyager. When you look at the ratings, each show, like, viewership was dropping in comparison, and the season to season comparisons are dropping even more. I think the audience was getting oversaturated with Trek. Absence does make the heart grow fonder. So I'm sure a better film coming out then would have done better, but I'm not sure. Everybody points to Nemesis as something that killed the franchise. If the franchise could survive Trek 5 and continue after the motion picture, we can't just point it at Nemesis. And Enterprise only got better by the time it got to its last seasons, but people were generally burned out on it. So I don't think we can throw it all at this, but the crew deserved a better note to go out on. All right, next up we are switching back to the original series. And you'll notice with the original series, it's showing up a fair bit, but that's because it has the most movies. So sitting in 9th place, I have Star Trek: The Search for Spock. And Search for Spock is all right. There's some really good stuff in it, with Bones going crazy due to Spock's living spirit, or his Katra, which Spock implanted in him in the Wrath of Khan. The plot with the crew objecting to Starfleet orders and breaking them is great. The destruction of the Enterprise scene is so well done. I think it's the moment that stands from that movie for everybody. Heck, when you even search for Spock on YouTube and most sites, the first thing it takes you to is that scene where they've sacrificed the Enterprise A to take out the Enterprise to take out the Klingons, and it's like, what have we done? There's some really good stuff, and the Genesis stuff going haywire is also great, but the rest is kind of blah. Spock coming back is spoiled by the title, and it would have been a much better surprise if we didn't know what it was going in. I don't have any suggestions as to what the title could have been, but it kind of gives it away. So a big moment that you could have felt, you already knew was coming. The recasting of Lieutenant Savick was distracting. Ellie, no, it's not Ellie Larder. I just can't remember her name, but who played Savick in the first one, I enjoyed more. Not that the new actress was bad, but it was just distracting. It was one of those cases where you couldn't get past it. The killing of Kirk's son, who was a character we just met in the last movie, and it doesn't seem to impact Kirk deeply in this film, is something that underserves both of those characters. Overall, it's a mixed bag, and it's not one I can enjoy as much. But unlike the previous 3 on this list, this is one I'll actually be more inclined to sit down and watch every once in a while. Next up, we are switching back to the next generation of films. We're talking about the first film in that part of the series, Star Trek Generations, which is it's an okay or all right Trek movie. I'll say we're out of the really, really bad ones. And these are a bunch of the Trek films they're okay. There's few really good ones, and then there's a bunch that they're all right, and then some just like they're awful. The Trek franchise of films really shows a bunch of different quality. Hi, Loons. Hi. Sorry, Loons is pinned between my chair and the Christmas tree. Where we at? Yeah, so with Generations, it does have some good stuff. Seeing the Enterprise B was great. I love when we get to see some of those in-between Enterprises, because we had the Enterprise, then the refit, and then the Enterprise A. And then after that, we jumped to Next Gen, where we were at the D. And I really loved seeing the Enterprise B. It was a cool ship. And then in yesterday's Enterprise, the episode where we saw the C, I'm like, I want a miniseries based on that crew. But yeah, seeing the Enterprise B and how Kirk died, in quotations, saving it, was interesting. Picard coping with the death of a family member and then going through all that range of emotions was wonderful, because Sir Patty Stew is a great actor. And notwithstanding the weird execution of it being at a bed and breakfast, Picard meeting Kirk as the two most famous captains in all of Starfleet was a good moment. The Nexus ribbon was a cool idea. The destruction of the Enterprise D was really good. In the movies, when they do the destructions of the Enterprise, that's where they deliver a lot. But all those good stuff being said, the film does have flaws. It's really not the most interesting. At points, the pacing just lags and dies, and it becomes really boring. The way Kirk actually dies at the end of the movie is really lame. He could have gotten a better send-off. And what's interesting is this film was shot and developed simultaneously with season 7 of Next Gen, especially the finale. And when you read interviews with the cast, crew, and producers and all that, they're saying like we were stretched very thin because we were wrapping up like the runaway success revival show, and they were wanting to nail the series finale, and then at the same time trying to launch the crew onto the big screen. And something gave, and Generations gave. They will say like the finale would have been a better movie than Generations. Not to say Generations is bad. It's got some good stuff. Heck, there's a great episode from Hot Takes with Billy Business that talks about this episode that I'd really recommend checking out. All right, next up is another one that's going to be a controversial one because it is considered one of the best of the original series. But for me, I have a big hang up. I'm talking about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. And here's my big hang up. The presence is the premise is really dumb. Like really, really dumb. You can call this one Star Trek IV: Save the Bloody Whales. I got no problem with saving whales, but okay, so in the movie, it's all about a satellite that's going towards Earth, that into the Milky Way galaxy, that only speaks humpback whale. And if it doesn't get that in response, it starts destroying stuff. It causes geostorms and ships to lose power because no humpback whales are answering its call. Which, my brain hurts. And the crew of the Enterprise / the Klingon warbird that they stole, they need to go back in time and save the whales. My brain hurts more. It was a very 80s movie, and to the point that my joke is Trek 5 should have been called Recycle, because if we're going by over obvious 80s and 90s themes, there we go. And the score could have been done by Wham. The movie, aside from the really dumb premise, there's a lot of good comedy in the crew going back in the 80s into San Francisco, and that's what people really liked about this movie, because it was the most accessible Star Trek movie. I think up until some of the recent ones, it was the highest grossing and one of the most critically enjoyed because of how accessible it is. Splitting up the crew across San Francisco, doing stories where Spock's remembering who he is, and then the natural comedy that comes from being fish out of water, and then also looking at what we hope mankind will become and showing it against who we were at the time, and not doing it preachily, but doing it for laughs. That's really enjoyable stuff. This isn't one I revisit the most, though, because I can't get beyond the premise. I find it really, really dumb. Headache causing dumb. If you're going to do that, you have to play up that premise for laughs, and they don't. You can do big dumb and have it be awesome and fun, while you still treat the big dumb part as big dumb. And to this is like, no, this is super schnarious. So I can't get past that, and that's why it ranks so low on this list. All right, next up, and I know people will disagree with this one being so high or above in quality, above The Voyage Home. But next I have Star Trek Insurrection. It gets a lot of flack, but I still enjoy it. Like I said on a previous episode, in Michael Pillar's book, Fade In, about the writing of Insurrection, I read the initial pitch, and I'm like, that would have been a much better movie. But it's still, to me, I still enjoy it. But it is, by all accounts, a basically a feature-length episode of the series with a film's budget. Seriously, if this was delivered, if Next Gen was coming out now and they did this on a streaming service, I doubt anybody would complain. They'd roll with it. But because it was a feature film with basically what felt like an episode's story, which movies shouldn't be, it does stick out for people. It's not bad. I know a lot of people think it is, but to me it's not. I think the feature length, the episode thing kind of worked with this, but it's not what everybody wanted. But I get how they got there. With First Contact, which was written by Jonathan Frakes, aka Will Riker, number one, he went big. And then with this one, which he also directed, he went small. And the nice thing was it continued First Contact's trend of actually justifying Worf being there instead of on DS9. The scene where Picard ditches the classical music to dance to the Mamba was hilarious. The ethical dilemma of the Federation relocating people without asking is an interesting one. And if they justified why it got to a conflict, but I would have been interested in seeing how the stuff not affecting the crew, how they could have resolved it. I can't hate it. It brings Troy and Riker back together. It's the movie that finally got them back together. But the downside is the main conflict is debatably weak. The film doesn't have enough necessarily for people to sink their teeth into. There's stuff that would work in an episode that doesn't work as well in film. Looking at you, Data's singing number. It's kind of fun, but it's not necessarily the best. It jumps for action where diplomacy was the name of Picard's game. And then its most egregious offense is they have Riker shave his beard. No, that's a huge no. Riker has had his beard since season 2. People don't take Riker seriously without his beard. That is not Will Riker without the beard. That beard is majestic. You do not take it away. Yeah. As much as I love TNG, their movies, except for one, haven't been great. And this, for me, this is the second best of the TNG films for me, but I wanted better for those outings. All right, so now we're in the top 6, and we're in the top 5, and here's where I know this one's probably the most controversial placing, but here's where I'm going to put Star Trek Into Darkness. So let's get it out of the way. It is really, really flawed, but the thing is, I still like it. Its main problem is its reference to Wrath of Khan. Trek 09 had some really good and organic references to Wrath of Khan. The Kobayashi Maru, the putting bugs in your head that make you reveal information, a stronger villain who is obsessed with vengeance or wrath. But they made that fit Trek 09 without lifting exact plot points, like straight up same dialogue and scenes. Also, the creation of the personal transports is dumb, because then why does anybody need ships? And the use of the super blood is also dumb, because now people can't die. Death is no longer a thing. Why is this not being produced on a wide scale? Those are really weak, and neither are mentioned again, so that makes it even worse. The film also repeats certain things, including from the fantastic score from Trek 09 a little bit too much. And then finally on the faults front there was that Carol Marcus scene where she stripped down kind of in front of Kirk for no reason. People tried to argue that it was empowering. I don't see how. It served no purpose. Excuse me a sec. I gotta let Luna out. Okay, and we're back. So with Trek 09, Trek Into Darkness, the things I really liked about it, however, were the action was top notch. The characters are a blast and used fairly well. The incorporation of Section 31 worked. I really like Section 31 when it's used properly. And the score were also still really good, although the score relied on Trek 09 a little too much. But the two best parts for me, though, were Benedict Cumberbatch's Khan and the growth of Kirk. I've talked to people, and a bunch of Trekkies which suggest that you ignore this film and go from Trek 09 into Trek Beyond, which to me is too huge a jump, because there's a huge jump from cocky, I'm right, you're wrong Kirk from Trek 09 to the loving and weary leader Kirk in Beyond. And to me, you'd feel like you're missing a step of this progression, and that's this movie. The first half of the movie, you find Kirk very much like he is in Trek 09, but with an added layer of caring about people a little bit more. But throughout this film, you find him being challenged with situations and foes who can end him on a whim. He loses his new father figure in Pike. Then he loses his command, his relationship with Spock is challenged, and in anger he rushes into things and dismiss people, and you see him learning from these things. You see him growing to a point where he's willing and does make a sacrifice for his crew, something Kirk in the last movie wouldn't necessarily do. Kirk grows in this movie, and it shapes him into who he would be in Trek Beyond. To me, you can't skip this. This movie has so much growth for Kirk, and Pine knocks it out of the park. But then we also get Benedict Cumberbatch's Khan, which is to me a great villain. He didn't try to impersonate Ricardo Montalban's great original performance. This was fully his take on this character, and I loved his take. In terms of the physicality, he showed he was superior. He was a one-man Khan class wrecking crew to Klingons and Starfleet alike, and his performance just sitting perfectly straight sends you a different message about the guy. How he showed, like, his line delivery was cold, it was arrogant, it was chilling. He showed his intellect through his body language and his dialogue. I loved his performance, especially in the scene where he's negotiating with Spock, and then it's like, I will walk over your cold corpses to save my people. Now shall we begin? I loved that scene. Like, that was a highlight of the flick for me. Give me more Benedict Cumberbatch as Khan. Seriously, I would love a series. I know they'll never revisit it because it was super... because the Kelvin timeline is kind of dead in the water. But I dug it. I dug it a lot. Next up on the list is... We're going back to the original series films, and we are at Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. And this is my favorite... second favorite of the original series of films. It's the final adventure of the TOS crew, and it's an interesting adventure and a great one for them to bow out on. There's a great assassination plot. There's seeds of distrust. Both the Klingon and Federation are doing some shady stuff, and I love when you see the Federation doing some shady stuff, because as much as they're striving to be a utopia, they're still flawed people. And they don't think they should be entering in piece together. The Klingons think that's weakness, and the Federation's like, you can't trust these warmongers. The performances from all the cast are great. The special effects, with the exception of the 3D blood at one point, are all solid. And this is where it follows up. Earlier I mentioned one of my gripes with Searcher Spock is when the Klingon Christopher Lloyd kills Kirk's son. Kirk is minorly upset, but they don't really dive into his feelings. This is the follow-up on that. It shows how Kirk hates the Klingons for killing his son. And the performance was great. The writing was great. It was really solid. And I'm like, finally we're getting this. It sucks that it took 3 movies to get this. We could have used this a little bit earlier, but the delivery, the payoff was great. It was also really cool to see Michael Dorn, who plays Worf, playing an ancestor of Worf when he was the advocate for Kirk and Bones. Honestly, there's not anything I don't like about this movie. As I said, it was a great note for the TOS crew to bow out on. All right, up next, we are jumping to the Kelvin timelines again for number 3 and 2. 3 is Trek 09. aka just Star Trek, but to distinguish it, I just call it Trek 09. For me, it was really, really solid, and it's one I liked a lot. There's not much I don't like about it. Okay, there was points of almost nudity, and I could have gone without that. But that's something that's been in Trek since Roddenberry was. It's been in Trek from the ground up. The cast is great. The score is fantastic. The characters are interesting and bullheaded. A lot of people are like, that's not that character, but I'll disagree. There was a lot of traits of classic Kirk, classic TOS characters in these versions. And the thing I like, one of the things I like the most about it, people will be like, well, Star Trek's not about action. Well, guess what? Action's been in Trek, again, since the original series. Kirk Fu is a thing. Look it up. In the movies, action has been a big part of the movies since The Wrath of Khan. So don't at me about action not being in Star Trek flicks. It is. It's been here from day one. And the nice thing was, the fighting finally looked good. Like, Kirk Fu is what it is. I've joked in the past that whenever on Next Gen or DS9, whenever there's a fight going, it's always palm strikes because it's advanced martial arts or whatever. Here we finally get good fist fights. We get good fighting action. There was fists, there was kicks, and there was swords, which was random, but it worked. This isn't what Trek's about, but it's something that's been here from the ground up. So it's something I've really enjoyed actually seeing. The biggest strength for this movie for me, though, is the way the story handles that this is its own timeline and makes a clear statement about that. It's not rewriting Trek. People say it's a reboot. It's not. It's its own thing. If it was a true reboot, then it wouldn't have done the beginning where they or that part later where they explain like Spock, classic Spock came back. Wouldn't have done any of that. It's its own thing. It is it is you could say it's a reboot-quel, I guess. We could go with that. But it's not out and out rejecting everything that came before it. And that works. It freed itself from 53 years of continuity so the franchise can go into a different direction. Some don't feel this is necessary, but I understand why they thought they did. Again, Nemesis bombed out of theaters. The viewer retention from season to season and show to show was dropping. By the end, like, Enterprise was aimed to go to 7. It lasted 4, and it got axed. It was ready to get axed at 3. So this needed to appeal to a wider audience. And it worked. You can joke that this was J.J. Abrams' Star Wars demo reel, and that's fair. And I know the lens flares got really distracting, but there's a great film in here, and for me, it's one of the best Trek flicks. But it's not better than Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek Beyond, I put in my top 3 Trek flicks. And I know, again, controversial, but it is hands down the best of the Kelvin Timeline films. Yeah, Trek Beyond is great. And if you're not sure which one I'm talking about, it's the one where they use the Beastie Boys song Sabotage to help the crew win. A lot of people take issue with that. I know Christian pointed out ages ago on here that it worked. It worked in the movie, and it worked for this current iteration of Trek on film. And it's a reference to this current thing. For me, that was a celebration of where Trek is. I never thought I'd want Beastie Boys in Star Trek, but they made it work in the trailer for Trek 09. They made it work within Trek 09. And I was perfectly on board with our explanation of why it was in. It was harmless fun. So why does this one rank so much higher, or not so much higher? Well, yeah, so much higher than Into Darkness, and then also higher than Trek 09. It's because it got to be its own thing. Trek 09, for all its goodness, had to be the setup movie. Into Darkness, again, while enjoyable, was way too dialed into being the Wrath of Khan. As they were developing it, they really thought they had to redo it, and not in a disrespectful way, but they got too dialed into honoring and recreating it in reverence. Beyond finally got to be its own story. It was where the characters were at their best, where the movie with the characters. Like the movie itself, they were a great amalgamation of what came before and what's currently happening. Kirk in this movie is at a crossroads and a great leader. The crew seems like a great family. It features so much good Trek stuff, including uniforms and ship designs from Enterprise, an actual log entry near the beginning, chock full of so many original series references. The use of the female characters is at its absolute best in the 3 films. They get the amazing balance of the Kirk, Spock, and McCoy relationship with all 3, but especially Karl Urban shines in that role in this, in his interactions with Spock in this movie. The destruction of the Enterprise, again, is a great scene and a gut punch. We've seen the Enterprise, especially in the Kelvin timeline, take a beating before, but we haven't seen it torn to shreds and apart like this. The comedy is organic. The new characters, especially Jayla, work. Heck, and again, I thought the Beastie Boys thing worked. It was a great nod to the current franchise. I honestly can't think of anything I don't like about this movie. It's one of the best Trek movies overall for me. Don't at me too much about this. All right, and then next up is a bit of a cheat. You'll notice I've been doing 12, and really there's 13 Star Trek movies, and the reason I've narrowed it down to 1 is I cannot. It's an honest tie. Number 1 for me is an honest tie between Star Trek First Contact and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I legitimately love both of these movies. Let's go with The Wrath of Khan first. It's the best out of the original series. It wasn't going to be anything else. Wrath of Khan is an amazing sequel. It fixes everything wrong that came in the first movie and helped make sure there would be Trek for years to come on the big screen. It had a sense of adventure and brought in a great villain. And Khan is up there with great Trek villains with the Borg and Gul Dukat. Those are the 3. Now I know Borg is a species overall, but the Borg are awesome. And Gul Dukat from DS9 is amazing. There was some great and tense moments between Kirk and Khan, and that's especially well pulled off because the actors never actually shared a moment together in person. There's a great moral conversation about playing God through the Genesis device. We get interesting new characters, an exciting plot, the gut punch of Trek, and Spock sacrificing himself. Kirk figuring out old age as he's growing, and then learning he has a son. The loss of a friend. There's so much good stuff in The Wrath of Khan. Wider film. Aside from The Empire Strikes Back, The Wrath of Khan is the model for what a sequel should be. It improved upon what came before it, and it set the bar and the standard of quality for what was to come after it. It impacted and changed Trek for the better, and is unquestionably the best movie of the TOS era. It's an expression in film. We're going to go Wrath of Khan on it. Wrath of Khan is outstanding. With First Contact, it is unquestionably the best of the next generation of films, and the next generation films, and for me it's honestly tied. I go back and forth at certain points over which one's better, so that's why I have them tied. It is as good as Wrath of Khan. It's also one of the few Trek films you can recommend to non-Trekkies. I wish First Contact was the first next generation movie, and I wish they could have gotten something close to its level for the crew to go out on. Incorporating the Borg, who are the best Trek villain species, going back in time, Picard becoming obsessed, Riker on Earth with Cochrane, the Enterprise E looking awesome, the Battle of Sector 1 at the beginning, Worf yelling, "Perhaps it is a good day to die," and prepare for ramming speed, and in general, the best use of Worf in the next generation films, and I'd argue the best use of Worf in Next Generation in general. Lily, the Earth character, played by Alfred Woolley. Sorry if I'm getting her name wrong. Her interaction with Picard and calling him out for basically becoming Ahab. Giving Voyager a shout out with the EMH and DS9 a shout out with the Defiant. Patrick Stewart giving a career performance for his Picard role. The balance with this cast is great. Even Barclay gets to show up, which was awesome. I guess if I have to, I love so much about this movie. If I have to give some flaws, this is strictly a nitpick, because to me this isn't an actual flaw. It's just to recognize some people feel, some other Trekkies feel she was a bad idea. The Borg Queen and the impact she had on the Borg is debatable as to whether or not it's good or bad. I don't think it's bad. I just have to acknowledge that some people do. And the subplot with the Queen seducing Data was okay. It's not bad, but it's one of those things on repeat viewings I'm the least interested in. But it is an amazing film. The score is absolutely beautiful. It's probably my favorite Star Trek score, period. It's the one I go back to. It's the one I can listen to while I'm on the go. It's the best of the Next Generation films, and debatably the best of all Star Trek films. And that's why it's tied with Wrath of Khan, because Wrath of Khan is amazing in its own right. These two are the elite tier of the Star Trek films. All right, dear listener, with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope my rationales made sense. So if you disagreed with them, please don't at me. Let me know in the comments, how would you rank the Star Trek movies? I love talking about this because it can be fun if we're not yelling at each other. I'll say finally again, though, the thing with the whales is dumb. All that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you for listening, for keeping me and my family in your prayers, and your continued support of One Cross Radio. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care, and God bless, my friends. Peace.